Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today I'm going to get to say, I told you so. So I've just finished running a fantastic session of World of the Last Sun with my DCC crew, and it's been great, but I really had to make this video now because this is just news I really want to talk about because it confirms everything that I've been saying for a long time. If you are not a long-time viewer, you might not know this. And if you're not a long-time viewer, please subscribe to the channel and check out all my other videos. But those of you who have been following me for a while now will have seen me repeatedly state that part of the agenda of the kind of wokest takeover of D&D and Wizards of the Coast is that they don't actually like adventuring. They don't actually like, especially the heroic ideal. They don't like the concept of myth. They don't like virtue. They don't like the hero's journey. They don't like any of that stuff, right? And they also have all of this ideological agenda, which basically revolves around an erasure of tradition and erasure of history, all of that. And so to sum up, and I've said this many, many times in many videos, what the current people in control in Wizards of the Coast want to create is a world where every D&D setting is literally 21st century Seattle values, right? Just with like elves and tieflings and stuff. But it's basically people doing cosplaying while living in 21st century Seattle and having 21st century Seattle values and basically acting like hipster millennials in a fantasy world. And, people, I'm sure a lot of you already agreed with that and saw that trend that I was describing. But now it's basically beyond argument. There's no way you can deny it. And the reason for that is because of the latest published D&D adventure. So in D&D Beyond, the newest D&D adventure, connected to their appallingly bad new Strix Haven book, is an adventure where instead of being heroes, going out on a quest, solving a mystery, fighting an evil, doing something typical of the traditional fantasy genre, your characters are working in a cafe. Literally, you are literally working in a cafe. The adventure is called the Fire Jolt Cafe, and it's a scenario where you are employees of a cafe. I swear that I'm not making this up. You can go check it out. It's on D&D Beyond. And the adventure is not about fighting evil, defeating, killing monsters, obtaining treasure. It's not about going on a noble heroic quest. It's not about saving lives. It's not about any of those sorts of things. It is an adventure where your characters are working while hanging out in a cafe, and you have to resolve situations that are just, like typical fantasy situations, like having to deal with a very complex order, coffee order, handling a difficult customer, and making a special recipe. I swear that that's all like literally stuff that is in this adventure. It's an adventure that has zero actual adventuring in any sense that anybody normal would define it. And it's all about your characters just kind of like, it's a sitcom, right? It's a zany, intersectional diversity sitcom where your characters are hipsters hanging out in a Seattle you're working at Starbucks, right? you're minimum wage employees hanging out and working and being, oh my God, so random, and talking about your lives and, dealing with good and bad customers and all of that sort of stuff, that you're there just doing that, okay? And this is literally happening. There's no way you can ignore this or deny it. It is exactly what is going on. And I mean, we saw this trend. It was already developing for quite some time, right? And it started when, as far back as the Waterdeep book, where what you saw was a transformation. I mean, you look at the Forgotten Realms products that have come out for 5th edition, And on the surface, you look at, oh yeah, it's just like the Forgotten Realms, right? But there were significant changes that were made that transformed not the outer trappings, but transformed the culture of those places, especially in the Waterdeep book, that you're not dealing with a medieval fantasy city there, or even just a fantasy city in the classic, fantasy mold of which, any number of fantasy books are based, right? It's not inspired by Lord of the Rings or Lankmar or any of the. It's not inspired by Elric or by any of the Thieves' World, whatever. Any of the fantasy series, and it's not really a fantasy world. It is a postmodern world. It is the world of 21st century Seattle specifically, but you could say the left coast, right? Or even the liberal coastal elite concept, right? New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, right? Where people act as though they are 21st century people with 21st century values, with 21st century priorities. And although there was obviously still adventuring in those books, you had this shift into it having to do with characters increasingly acting like contemporary people. And this has obviously, step by step, become more and more directed in that way. So, you have the adventures in the Candlekeep book and, the Ravenloft setting book. The context of it is like everybody has postmodern values rather than behaving like, not necessarily like a historical culture, but behaving like a non-industrial culture or behaving like any other kind of society, right? Like the obligation that they have is this obligation that their products have to be propaganda, right? Their products have to be the main purpose of their books, as much as they think they can get away with at each step, is to be indoctrination into their ideological agenda. And of course, in each book, they can push it a further step, which is why each book is worse than the last, right? So and then in the last couple of products, in the Carnival setting book, where the one where they invented Thaco the Clown as depending on who you ask, either a specific attack on me or a generic attack on all old school gamers. I think that the answer is it's mainly both, right? But beyond that setting is a setting where the point that, and this is very important for them, because if part of the indoctrination is that that the traditional concepts of good and evil, or even of law and chaos, if these things are not just unimportant, but they're also wrong and potentially even evil from their point of view, those things have to be eroded until they're erased. And so the idea of adventuring for heroic quests, of doing great deeds, and especially of that idea of fighting and defeating evil, have to be eliminated. And one of the best ways to eliminate this is to eliminate, first, the idea of combat being something important in an RPG, and second, the idea of adventuring itself being important in an RPG, right? So in the Carnival setting, you had people, you're going around and looking at these weird and crazy sights and these funny things and these weird people that are in the carnival, but it's not like, it's not an old school horror setting or something. Like, you could have had some kind of a dark carnival where the adventure consists of some kind of Stephen King-esque sort of evil clown or something like that, right? And you have to defeat these people. But that's not what it is. It's just you're going around encountering different things, and there are challenges of certain kinds, but you can also just be kind of like being there and having this experience of hanging around in these, oh my God, so random places, right? Because that's what they all want to replace. They want to kind of infantilize fantasy and replace the idea of the heroic quest or the heroic journey with people just going around and doing wacky stuff, right? And so it's got a touch of humor in it, and it's got, bad humor, because, leftists can't make jokes anymore. And it's got bad humor, and it has these kind of zany experiences that are, not they're not good in any way, because they're not, really good. Sort of like if it was something like Gonzo's always a little bit transgressive, right? And there's nothing transgressive about this, right? Everything about it is absolutely to maintain the dominant ideology of the establishment, right? So it's all about highlighting difference and diversity, highlighting, by which they mean that people can look different and can act in weird ways, and that normativity is evil. And that, you don't actually have any diversity at all in thought, right, or in behavior. And you don't have epic ideological conflicts, because there's only one ideology that's right, and it's theirs, and everything else cannot even be entered into the subject, because the point is to indoctrinate you in that ideology, right? And then you had Strix Haven, which is a setting book of you're playing college students in a college of magic, where your life is a hot mess and you're going to the prom. and of course, in much like we see in the comics worlds now, in the world of Strix Haven, there's a whole huge mix of different weirdo characters that are, you've got all the half tieflings and the Asimars and the Genasi and the Tabaxi and all of these things that are basically just furries in essence, or people just not willing to actually create interesting characters, especially not with struggles to overcome or anything like that. It's just about showing off a different kind of fashion aesthetic, and apparently in these worlds, at least 50% of the population is LGBT, right? And I've wrote one of the first RPGs that talked about and completely presented in a non-negative way the characters that would be definable in our culture as queer, right? In Arrows of Indra. I've certainly had other characters in some of my other products. And, if you check out my newest product, which is the Old School Companion 2 Medieval Authentic Adventures, you'll find adventures there where there are characters in medieval England who are gay, right? that happened, of course, and it's perfectly fine. The point is that's being done in this case as, again, just as part of this ideological virtue signaling, and it makes the characters uninteresting, right? And if it's just all about presenting this completely shallow image of diversity. And in Strix Haven already, there is a plot that has a kind of an antagonist. It's apparently completely ripped off of Harry Potter. I'm not a follower of Harry Potter, so I couldn't really say, but I've had it reliably told to me that basically, by people who are Harry Potter fanatics and who've also read Strix Haven, that it's just literally ripped out of Harry Potter. And it's clearly secondary to the main point. They made it very clear. I am now quoting their own words, right? Strix Haven is about you being a college student whose life is a hot mess in a college of magic instead of a college of, gender studies or, cultural studies or communications or, African dance studies or whatever else it is that the most privileged people in the history of humanity end up taking in their fake degrees, where they don't actually get an education on anything except their ideology that they already agree with, because they've been indoctrinated in that for the last 18 years as kids, that's the stuff that they care about, right? So that's what it's about. And now we have a literal adventure where your characters are literally working in a cafe, which I guess makes sense because, after you graduate with one of those degrees, the only thing you're qualified to do is work in a cafe, So that's I guess that's the future development of the Strix Haven campaign, right? It's literally what happens to all the SJW crowd in in 21st century Seattle, right? When you complete your job, if you're really lucky, maybe you end up being a diversity consultant and get paid enormous amounts of money to basically be a political commissar. But most people, the ones that are semi-lucky, I guess, end up working minimum wage jobs while trying to get, either Patreon or OnlyFans money for their art, whatever it might be. And then some of them instead graduate onwards to being Antifa terrorists, which means that you're usually either on a sex offender registry or you're a public school teacher, which is, when you think about it, a really questionable combination of groups, right? But those are the two biggest associations that you see among people who've been arrested for Antifa related activity. They're always either involved in the education of children or they're on sex offender registries. So you have to say, well, what the hell is going on there? But that is the future that they want for D&D. That's what they want D&D Adventures to be from now on. It's what they're aiming for. Can this possibly last? Well, they didn't even dare to make this into a book that's for sale, right? They put it in D&D Beyond, so anybody who's on D&D Beyond can get it for free, and you can see how unbelievably stupid it is, right? But I think that's not going to stop them from trying to make something similar to this in the future as actual book products. I mean, Strix Haven is already a ridiculous product, and the fact is that I think probably since Volo's Guide onwards, there has been not an enormous, but a steady drop in the amount of sales. Now, it doesn't mean that D&D is losing money. Nobody's saying that, right? They are making money, but they're suddenly making less money than they used to. And the more that they push in this direction, the more that they're going to lose people that are like, well, these things, this isn't the same kind of fun anymore, because it's not meant to be fun anymore. It's meant to be an exercise in virtue signaling, which only about 8% of the population will really care about. And a lot of that 8% of the population will not even buy the book, much less play the game. They'll want to demand that the game be that, but they have no interest in actually playing. They hate D&D, right? Why would they be involved in playing it? So I think this is the future that they want to create. Will there be a pushback? Well, I think we're not in for a short haul when it comes to RPGs. I think that there's other areas where there has been some real consequences that have started to happen, and that's especially in television and movies, which is where real numbers of money and really clear things like ratings make certain points obvious, right? Like the woke television and woke movies are bombing at an incredible level, and whereas the ones that are not woke are being successful. It doesn't mean they have to be anti-woke necessarily. Like, the Spider-Man movie is not anti-woke. It's just not woke. It's not about pushing an ideology, and it was incredibly successful, right? So I think Sony has realized that that's the way to go, and now, these things, even there in those sorts of industries, movies and television, because, it takes a couple of years from the moment that a show or a film is pitched until it starts to come out, right? And so everything is going on an agenda of, let's say, at least 24 months, right? There's going to be stuff that's going to keep coming out now that was based on this model by which the SJW sold themselves to all media in every context, like, comics and television and movies and video games and RPGs, that, if you make these products, you're going to diversify your market because the nerds will keep buying it anyways. And then we're also going to, by making this game where we present a disabled Latinx gender fluid character, you're going to have all kinds of Latinos, well, Latinxes, they'll say, that'll buy the product. That's not true, but that's how they sold it. And people, these guys fell for this idea that somehow this would expand their market in vast new directions, when it won't, right? Because the 1% of Latinos who believe in saying bullshit like Latinx will probably not buy it anyways because they hate RPGs, And the ones that are actual Latinos who are already playing D&D will hate what you've done and will be offended by the idea of creating a Latinx character or whatever. And then, you know, the majority of people who weren't playing D&D who are Latino will not in any way be more likely to be drawn to these products for it. They'll be less likely to be drawn to this products. And I used Latinx or Latino in this case as my example because, you know, I'm Latino. But I think the same applies to any of the supposed groups that these people claim that they are speaking for, and that they claim that creating these ridiculous communist-influenced pantomimes of these groups are that this is somehow going to be appealing to anybody normal in any of these groups. It's not, you know, and that's even happening in politics, right? The more that the Democrats use the term Latinx, the more Latinos start voting Republican. So there you have it, and that is going to turn around eventually, I think, but it's, you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's going to especially be so in areas where you have much smaller, you know, the smaller the money involved is, the longer the problem is, right? Like comics has had the problem longer than anyone, and they could literally just run traditional comics into the ground, right? Like Marvel and DC might cease to exist before the SJW control of it can be wrested, because the companies that own those lines they don't really care about comics anymore. So if it becomes completely unprofitable, they'll just shelve it, right? And Wizards of the Coast Hasbro might do the same thing to D&D if it becomes completely unprofitable. It's possible, but they might not. They might also, the fact is that if the trend starts to reverse in things like movies and TV, then other companies, like a big company like Hasbro, might realize it's time to reverse that trend with their games, you know, and they might turn away from the way that they're doing stuff with D&D now. But the thing that is certain is that if Wizards keeps making products about people hanging out in cafes instead of having epic adventures, they are going to end up losing a lot of customers. This is a ridiculous product, and it's a ridiculous direction they're going in, but it proves everything I said about what the actual agenda is. So anyways, that's basically what I wanted to talk to you about today. Just some programming notes. My new old school companion to Medieval Authentic Adventures is out. It's already a bestseller on Drivethru. Thank you to everyone who's bought it so far. It's also been it got to number 1 in the OSR Hot Titles list. It got to the top 10 in the general Hot Titles list, so it's been very, very good so far. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's 320 pages with 26 adventures. So, you know, don't buy stuff like Candlekeep. Buy stuff like Medieval Authentic Adventures to get some adventures that are all based on real, either medieval history, medieval folklore, legends, and myth that you can use in any OSR or any D&D derived game. You can also use it, I guess, in other fantasy games with a little bit of modification, obviously, for the rules, for the attribute or the stat blocks or whatever. But yeah, you can pick it up, and they're scenarios that run from all the way from absolute beginner level all the way up to very high level, and they're all very different from each other. Lots of interesting stuff in there. Check it out. I still haven't gotten my copy, of course, because living in South America, it means that my author's copy will take 4 to 6 months to arrive if I'm lucky. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. When it gets here, of course, I'll do a review. Anyways, check out all my other products too, like World of the Last Sun, Dark Albion, Star Adventure, Lion and Dragon, The Invisible College, which is also doing really well. And, you know, these are games that are made for adventuring, right? Be it heroic adventuring, like what you see in Lion and Dragon, you know, or historical adventuring, action adventure, space opera like Star Adventure, gonzo or weird fantasy adventuring, sword and sorcery type stuff like World of the Last Sun. You've got everything you need there, and I promise there's no scenario in any of these where you are working in a coffee shop. Stay tuned this week. I might do another video during the week, but I'm also going to have apparently a busy weekend. If all goes as planned, on Saturday I'm going to be guest starring on Dolly Pop's channel, I think with another game designer, Taylor Lane. It'll be a very interesting show. And then I think on Sunday we've got Inappropriate Characters. So be sure to check those out. And keep watching this channel. I'll probably do one other video in the week. And if not, well, we'll see you on the weekend on those other channels. Check out, if you want to listen to the adventure that we just ran in World of the Last Sun, check out the Bill the Elf channel, where there's audios of all of our sessions. And we have a really great time in all of them. I don't know how entertaining they are to listen to, but I guess, we have some people that really do get entertained by it. And you can get an idea of how my game mastering methods are, at least for when it comes to gonzo or weird fantasy. I'm very different when I'm doing stuff in kind of more serious fantasy like Lion and Dragon. But in World of the Last Sun, we kind of let it all go nuts. But it's still really great stuff. So I guess that's everything for today. Be sure to subscribe. Share this video anywhere that you think it'll be interesting to people or where you think it'll piss them off. Hit the like button and keep checking out all of my stuff. Currently smoking a Lorenzetti poker plus Argento Natural.